The other thing that's going on here that I just want to mention that is probably adaptively significant at this time frame, this time range, is the appearance of stone tools at about 2.5 million. So these are some of the stone tools that have been found. They're often referred to as Oldowan stone tools. They're not terribly impressive. They basically look like battered pebbles. And as you can see, they're quite small, most of them. We've now got them from a number of sites, that some of which date back to about 2.6, 2.5, and then we've got a series that come in about 2.4, 2.3. At the moment, we don't know who made them, so the typical reconstruction has been that they were produced by early Homo, so Homo habilis, Homo rudifensis. In fact, Homo habilis actually means handyman when it's translated, and this was an early assumption that Louis Leakey made, that the author of these stone tools was the species to which this specimen OH24 was assigned, Homo habilis. But actually, if we look at this in a fairly sort of dispassionate way and just look at where these early stone tools appear, there's a number of different possible species that could have produced them. And there's some evidence from South Africa that at least one of these Paranthropine species, Paranthropus robustus, may have been a tool user. Some suggestion that these bone tools were produced by robustus and actually used for breaking into termite mounds. So we don't know which of the species produced them, but they probably were a fairly important adaptive shift. Okay, one of the things that we know that they were used for, at least probably the flakes that were removed from these pebbles were used for, was for butchering carcasses. So here we have some cut mark bone from the site of Buri in Ethiopia, dating to about 2.5 million. And I think it's not unreasonable to think about these flakes as being a cultural adaptation, a technological adaptation that allowed the hominins to start invading the niche, either of the big cats or perhaps of the scavenging animals. So here's a sort of reconstruction of these guys butchering a zebra here. We don't know at this point whether they were getting to fresh carcasses, in the sense that they were actually bringing the animals down. Given their body size, that's perhaps doubtful, but it seems that they were likely to have been able to access carcasses that had been brought down by other animals, and maybe these flake tools gave them the edge doing that. So they're sort of a cultural equivalent of the carnassial in some of these carnivore species. Okay, so that's the early Australopiths and the later Australopiths. What we see at about 1.9 million is a pretty radical transformation going on in the course of human evolution, with the appearance of early humans, what I'm calling early humans. So we've got a series of species here. Homo ergaster from Kenya and South Africa, and also for the site of Dmanisi in Georgia, dating from about 1.9 to about 1.5 million. We have Homo erectus from a whole series of sites in Africa and also in East Asia, dating from about 1.8 to about 200,000 years ago. Homo antecessor from a couple of sites in the north of Spain, Grandolina, Cima del Elefante, dating to about 1 million, first appearing about 1 million. And then Homo heidelbergensis, some really nicely preserved material from a series of sites throughout Europe and also into Africa, dating from about 600,000 down to about 100,000. And one of the major parts of this transition, perhaps the most noticeable one, is a shift in body size. Okay? And basically what we see is a transition to a group of species that basically look like us below the neck. Okay? So if we look at these body mass figures, hopefully what you can see immediately is that their body masses, the reconstructed body masses, are very similar to our own. Okay, they're as big, if not in some cases, somewhat bigger than us on average. Okay, and so that's both in terms of body mass and also in stature. Okay, and here, what I've put on the board, this is the picture I showed you earlier of Lucy. Okay, and Lucy here is being compared to a fossil from about 1.5 million years ago called the Narukatomi boy, KNMWT 15,000. That's assigned to Homo ergaster and is about 80% complete. Okay. And it's thought that this individual died probably about age 10 and would have been taller than me as an adult, okay, if it had reached adult stage. So, I'm about 6 feet tall. So this would have been, a big individual. Okay, so we're basically seeing a transition in terms of body size, both mass and stature, to a group of species that essentially look like us, or in our ballpark in terms of body size. We also see a series of transitions in the postcranial skeleton towards obligate bipedalism, to our form of bipedalism. Subtle differences here and there, probably in how it was performed, but essentially below the neck they look pretty similar to us. So we can look at things like limb proportions. They shift such that they start looking like us in terms of limb proportions, in particular elongated thigh bones. The form of the pelvis, there are some changes in that. The shape of the rib cage changes. It goes from being this inverted funnel-shaped rib cage that we see in Lucy and chimpanzees to being the sort of barrel-shaped rib cage that we see in humans. A number of other characteristics that indicate that these species were obligate bipeds like us, and probably capable not only of walking but also running, and perhaps engaging in endurance running for that matter. Other characteristics that are less obvious but are probably equally important: reduction in the size of the teeth and jaws. Okay, so if we look at ergaster and erectus here, again we've got these body mass figures that are in the same sort of ballpark as ours, and the relationship between these dental and mandibular characteristics, the size of the mandible, the size of the molars, they're in the same. The relationship between these and body mass is similar to the relationship between these sort of variables and our own body mass that we see in us. So, basically the message here is that the masticatory morphology, the chewing morphology, was similar to ours. So, the suggestion there about their diet, there's been a sort of dietary shift as well. Relative brain size. In some of these species, there doesn't seem to be much of a shift from the Australopiths. So ergaster, for example, still had a relatively small brain, but in others, Heidelbergensis, for example, brain size is much larger, up towards 1,200 cubic centimetres, which is at the sort of lower end of the modern human range of variation. Interestingly, development is one of the things that doesn't seem to have shifted at this point in time. So we see here evidence in the work that's been done so far on the internal anatomy of the teeth that these species, the ones that have been looked at so far, ergaster and erectus, were growing up pretty fast, like apes. Okay, they didn't have the slow development of modern humans. So there are some important transitions, and then some of these adaptive characteristics retain the sort of states that we see in the Australopiths. Other important adaptive changes that we see in this time period, the period that these species are around, the appearance of Handaxes. Okay, here are a couple of pictures of Handaxes, and then a scatter of Handaxes on the ground. These first appear about 1.6 to 1.4 million years, and a Handax, as you can see, it's basically a large bifacially flaked stone tool. And it seems that there's been a lot of discussion about what these were actually for. And to my mind, the most plausible argument that's been made on the basis of butchery experiments, you can see some of these being carried out here, is that they were basically adaptations for processing large game animals. Okay? In fact, when these experiments have been carried out, comparing Handaxes to just regular flakes, unmodified flakes, the sort of thing that characterise the older one technology, the only thing that they differ in terms of their usefulness is their ability to butcher these large game animals. Okay? So again, this seems to be probably an important indicator in terms of the adaptive shifts going on in human evolution, the appearance of Handaxes. Controlled use of fire. Lots of discussion about when we first see the evidence for controlled use of fire. There's some early claims dating back to about 1.5 to 1.2 million, but most people are pretty sceptical about that. The earliest reasonably widely accepted data we've got suggests that it's occurring about 790,000 years ago. And we can obviously think about lots of reasons why fire might be adaptive. Cooking would be one, protection from predators would be another, and then also warmth, and thinking about hominids expanding out of Africa into cooler climates. Controlled use of fire might have been important.